Hello, my name is Michael Arden, and today I'll be discussing with you how climate change is impacting human life. So let's first off level set everyone and talk about what climate change is. So climate change is long-term changes to weather that occurs over decades and thousands of years. There's usually a lot of confusion between what weather and climate change actually is, and a lot of folks confuse climate change with actual weather events. So we'll talk about, how is it different from weather? So we already discussed climate change is decades and beyond. So it takes a very long time to do those particular shifts. And we're talking about thousands of years up to millions of years through the different ages, such as like the Ice Age, the Pleistocene epoch, up until the current one. Um, and so weather is a state of the atmosphere over days or weeks. We have the ability to predict weather up to a few days to a couple weeks, but after that, it gets a little sketchy. But climate change is how the weather patterns shift over a long period of time. So climate change is really more concerned with oceans, land surfaces, what the ice sheets and glaciers are doing and the annual temperatures over time. Um, Weather is on a more day-to-day basis. So rain, wind, temperature, and humidity, what those are doing, in the next couple days up to a few weeks. So let's start off first by how humans are affecting the climate. It's always an important topic because it's going to help um, show how the acceleration of the climate from humans is going to impact humans on their own. So fossil fuels, with the event of fossil fuels being discovered in industrial purposes back in the really took off during the World War I back in 1914, and then again in World War II. They were invented a lot earlier than that, about the 1800s, but those are really when the industrial around the world started taking off and really using fossil fuels. So fossil fuels emit byproducts, which are carbon dioxide, methane, and a couple other gases that leak out into the atmosphere. Once they're in the atmosphere, they create what they call a greenhouse gas. So these different types of substances get into the atmosphere and then they actually trap heat. So it works as like a greenhouse that would grow plants. The idea behind that is a greenhouse allows warmer temperatures so the plants can grow all year long versus being susceptible to that colder weather. Well, for the earth, that happens as well. And so it creates that greenhouse effect, which causes the temperatures to rise all around the globe. So with this event and a couple other things that cause climate change, humans are really accelerating the rise in annual average temperature every year. So climate change has been proven to, naturally happen. They've gone in and taken ice core samples and ocean sediments, and they can study those and show where the temperatures have warmed or cooled over the different centuries and millennials. But really, humans now are accelerating that and speeding that process up at a lot faster than it ever has before. So now let's get into, how climate is really affecting humans and the kind of what's going on with that. So sea level rise is one of the biggest ones. It's a very popular topic right now. This is caused by melting glaciers and sea ice. So the as the temperatures rise, they're causing more melt in glaciers and the sea ice. And what that's doing is, as those melt, that fresh water is then leaking down into the ocean across the world. And then it's causing the sea to rise at about a 1/8 of an inch per year. And then in that event, it has a couple, chain events that happen from that as well. So stronger storms, flooding, events that occur. And then because of those two things, there's a lot of coastal destruction. There's also been shown that 1 inch of sea level rise will equal about 8 feet of disappearing beaches. So 200 million people are going to be affected by these disappearing beaches. There's a lot of people that have homes along the coast. There's a lot of tourism that goes on in these beach areas, so they're going to be very affected by the sea level rise. The next thing that I'll show an example of is thawing permafrost. So permafrost is a thick sublayer of frozen earth. So it's really the soil, sediment, and rock layer that's been permanently frozen for a very long time. Roughly, there's about 35 million people that live in permafrost zones across the world. So areas like Alaska, Russia, some areas of China all have created these environments on top of permafrost. And so as the permafrost is thawing, it's creating this sappy, muddy environment. Anytime snow, ice, or anything like that melts, it always is very wet for a while afterwards. So what that is doing now is it's actually causing structural damage and causing what roller coaster roads. So as the roads are becoming very wavy, as that soil sinking down because it no longer has that hard backing to hold it up. There's buildings in Russia crumbling. Again, because the foundation of those structures are giving way because it's turning into a muddy environment and they're just sinking down into the earth. And then there's a danger to the Arctic-based energy infrastructure. So we have a lot of energy infrastructure in Arctic zones with drilling oil and different things like that. And as this permafrost melts, it's going to cause a lot of havoc to those industries. Wildfires is another big one. So dry climates are creating fast fuel. So as the droughts come in from the early snow melt, they're no longer getting the water supply that they normally do in areas like California, Colorado, Oregon in the United States. And then what it's doing is basically creating a perfect environment for wildfire. So something as simple as a lightning strike from a storm could start a spark, and then thousands to millions of acres get burned through these wildfires. So if we look at California in the year of 2020, they had a little over 4 million acres of wildfire that destroyed those. Colorado had about 700,000, and then Oregon had roughly 1 million. We can also look at the graph on the right here that shows the top 5 years with the largest wildfires acres burned since 1960. So if we take a look at that, the most alarming part of that is the top 5 fires ever in the U.S. are within the early 2000s to today. So they're very recent, which is a cause from the climate changing to warmer temperatures. So now we get into climate change and the economy. So really big industries that are affected by climate change are agriculture, forestry, fisheries, tourism, trade, and supply chains, and increasing demand for energy. As the temperatures get warmer, there's going to be a bigger supply for AC and other energies to combat those different temperatures going as well. The wildfires, like we talked about, is destroying forests. The warming ocean temperatures are wreaking havoc on the fish. Tourism from the beaches disappearing, and then agriculture with plants that are going to have to relearn how to really grow a lot of areas. And some species, they may never be able to grow in certain areas again. So let's dive into some examples from around the globe and the nation here in America for how that's affecting the economy. So climate disasters in the last 3 years have caused about $415 billion. That is due to flooding, heat, and drought, which is destroying agricultural businesses. Sea level rise could ruin beach communities, like I mentioned before, that rely on that tourism money. And an estimated about $2 billion could be lost in winter recreation due to the loss of snow and ice. So now let's jump over to Japan. Japan relies heavily on a fishing industry. They do a lot of fishing. It's one of their main food supplies for that island. So the industry is accounted for about 1.5 trillion Japanese yen just from fishing industry, which is a lot of US dollars. So the warming ocean waters is causing habitat loss. We know, a lot of coral reefs are being destroyed. There's a lot of fish species that don't do very well with the fluctuation of temperatures. And so they're going to end up moving to other areas around the ocean or just dying off altogether because they can't be sustainable in that ecosystem anymore. So the fishing industry in Japan is going to take a big toll if the continue of this climate change is trending the way it is. So if we hop back over to the Americas, we look at Brazil. Brazil is the largest producer of sugarcane, soy, coffee, oranges, Carne acai, and Brazil nuts. So this accounts for about 14% of the world's beef output as well. So they're a huge agriculture industry in Brazil, and that's where their economy really comes from. So the altering ecosystems from the warming temperatures is going to yield less crops for them. So the output and the export of those goods will actually lessen, which is going to affect the rest of the globe as well, since they're the largest producer of these products. The increased drought and temperatures are also going to hurt their beef industry. They're not going to be able to grow as much products to feed these cows as they would before. And as the temperatures continue to rise, it's going to be harder and harder on the animals themselves. And they're also not going to have enough water. Cows in the beef industry take a lot of water to sustain themselves. So the longer the drought goes on, they're not going to have that water to give to those animals. So, interesting feature. Everything sounds very negative with climate change, but Greenland is actually benefiting from climate change. I wanted to put this in here just to show kind of the other side of that. So 90% of Greenland's exports right now come from the fishing industry. Just like Japan, they rely heavily on fishing. Um, their landscape is a lot of frozen ice sheets, so they don't have room to do a lot of businesses in agriculture like other countries around the world. So now, because of the warming temperatures, they are showing that fish such as cod, which is a very big um, food source in the fishing industry, are making their way north because the water temperatures are rising. So they're actually having cod now show up in Greenland, um, which is a good market to sell to the rest of the world. They're also now able to grow turnips and potatoes, which they've never have before because the warming temperatures are causing the soil environments to rise as well and getting more higher temperatures in those areas. So they're actually to start growing crops now, which means they can actually begin a agricultural type of businesses, and which will diversify their economy. So the melting ice sheets allow the diversification of their economy. So they'll be able to do a lot of different things that they never have before. So if we look at the global economy as a whole, we look at the decline in gross domestic products is in store for the future. So as I was talking about with Brazil, with exporting their agricultural business, um, a lot of areas are going to show a decline in these products that they normally export to other areas around the globe. So we look at U.S. will decline about 10.5% per capita. China is about 4.3, and the European Unions are about 4.6. What that really means is as climate change continues, we're going to see a lot of different things affect the global economy because areas are going to now start turning it internal and keeping a lot of products in there for themselves. So we're looking at weakened production capacity. We're not going to be able to produce as much. The rising temperatures are going to cause a lot of different things that we'll have to really work through in engineering and science. It's going to create resource scarcity, like we were talking about with the fish and the beef and the cattle and stuff like that. Those resources they're going to turn internal and start keeping those in their own country and not exporting as much, which means that a lot of countries from around the world are going to have to start figuring out different systems to get food sources from those areas. There'll be new stakeholder demands, reduced demand for goods and services. So they're not going to have as much demand for these because one of the things is they're not going to be able to afford these different things, and increased capital and operation costs. So climate change is really going to affect the global economy as a whole. We're going to see a very loss in the money that each country is going to be able to gain. So, in conclusions, we have the rising temperatures are affecting a lot of landscape changes and ocean changes as well. That's really the biggest thing with climate change is that rising temperature. We're facing temperatures that we never had before in the past, and it's going to take a lot of brain power to figure out, kind of how we can live in these different environments, what they're actually going to change, and how to prepare for the future. Um, the big thing is the landscape changes will affect human life the most. With the changes of that, agricultural businesses and beef businesses, tourism, different things are going to be affected, which ultimately is going to affect the economy of each country around the world. And if you want to dive any farther into some of these details that I listed here are the references for those, and you can look at the different articles as well. Thank you for joining me today and have a good day.